So I'm Mark McLean. I'm the head of diversity, inclusion, and well-being at M&G. So I joined the program a few years ago now. Actually, this is the third opportunity I've had to have a mentee through the program. And I did it for two reasons. One is to give back to our community, right? Having become very senior in my role, I think we all have an opportunity, right, and a responsibility to do exactly that, to help mentor others, to help understand what barriers still exist, how maybe my experience is helpful in my journey to being a senior executive. And the second is I get so much from it, right? It's a very different perspective from each mentee, different level, different career aspirations, different personal journey. And it makes me continue to appreciate the work that needs to be done. So I hope I give some great advice from time to time, but I also am appreciative of the information that I get.
First of all, because in my day job, I organize similar programs to this mentoring initiative, it just started to dawn on me that I'm doing all of this work for others, but I'm not really prioritizing my own career development. I'm not really intentionally thinking about what I'd like to do next, and I'm not having those focused times that I can really see that all of the participants I'm supporting find really valuable. So that was one of the reasons. The other one is that it wasn't that long ago that I came out at work. I think it was around maybe 2021, so three or so years. So that's why I specifically wanted to find a program which where I knew that the mentors were either allies or members of the community. And this is the second year actually that I'm working with a mentor. I had an amazing mentor the previous years who's a very engaged ally, but I thought I just really wanted to work with someone who was actually part of the community and find a senior leader role model who's authentically themselves, who understands some of the things I might have to share, which are maybe a little bit more specific to being an LGBTQ plus person at work. So that was the other reason. And then when I found Mark, I thought, oh, that's your profile was exactly kind of like if I could have created the ideal mentor's profile, that would have been it. So I'm just very grateful for this opportunity, and for you, Lauren, and the LGBT great as well for facilitating these opportunities.
So for me, it reminds me the work isn't done, right? Because if I look at my career trajectory, right, there wasn't a lot of role modeling. Right? There weren't mentoring programs. I relied on allies, right? And as Sandy said earlier about having a reach back into the community, for me, it reminds me the work isn't done, right? That there are still barriers in place. Look, I introduced myself. I'm the head of diversity, inclusion, and well-being, and this is an aspect of making certain that that work is being done within our community. I don't have to just rely on the feedback from my colleagues. I hear from other individuals in the community, like Sandy, across the industry. So it helps me to remember, right? There are still biases in place. There are barriers in place. Sometimes they're self imposed, right? Sometimes there's an assumption about being out in the workplace that I hope can give some confidence, right? That you can be out, you can be your authentic self and still progress your career. I hope my career, now being an international executive, right, even moving country, has shown you can be authentically yourself. And sometimes we just need someone to remind us of that, right? And I think that's the interplay between mentor and mentee. It's not just one way. I continue to get good information. I continue to remind myself that there is work to be done. There are barriers in place for the LGBTQ plus community. And it helps me also understand generationally how people self-identify and want to self-identify, right? And I think that's a huge piece of work as a community we have to understand, because we are now at a point in history where we are a multi-generational out community in the workplace for the first time. I take all of that information to my work.
I think what it's really allowed me to do is take a step back, because knowing how busy Mark is, I wanted to make sure that we use that 1 hour that we have in a very intentional way, and that I focus on what would be most helpful for me to kind of discuss with him. And what that did, that I just spent a lot more time than I would normally do in terms of what's coming up for me, what are some of my challenges, what are some of the things that I can celebrate and I wanted to share with him. So it just gave me a little bit, but actually a lot more focus when it came to where I am in my career. And the other thing that I really, really valued is having someone who's impartial, who's a lot more experienced than I am, who's got a lot more years of navigating complex organizations, complex challenges, just being able to discuss situations at work in a way where I knew that Mark's sort of aim or goal from those sessions was purely to help me and to listen. And I think that was just so valuable, having that different perspective, but from someone who's a lot more experienced. Because I think often we discuss situations with our peers, with our friends, with our spouse, and that's really helpful as well. But by having someone who's been there, who's done that, who's seen it, and who's got the perspective, so you know that whatever is happening now, whatever might be a challenge, it's something that you can overcome, and you can kind of put it in a wider perspective. So that was really, really helpful. And the last thing which I wanted to share is I feel I'm a lot more, I just felt very empowered to kind of take control for the things that I can control, and also accept what I can't and not be too bothered by that. Like, I acknowledge that those factors are there and I'm mindful of them, but I'm a lot more focused on where can I make an impact. And I'm just speaking to my other computer, because there was a quote from Mark that really resonated with me. It's, things don't happen to you, they happen because of you. And that's something that really stuck with me, because I think I'm naturally, sometimes maybe I have a tendency to focus more on the big picture and some of the things that I don't really have influence over, and less on what I can actually change and have an impact on. So that, I would say, these are the key things where working with you, Mark, and being part of this program has been really, really helpful for me.
And if I could add, Sandy, I think one of the things you just said that's really important for anyone who might be listening to this, right, is you take the opportunity in these mentoring sessions to then force yourself to look at you, right? Being prepared. You said, excuse me, earlier, you spend your time in your role helping others develop, right? And this is your opportunity, and I think you do it really well, right? You come prepared. You come, and we first discuss what we talked about in the last session. You tell me how that has influenced some of what you've been doing. So I think for anyone listening, the best way to get the most out of these sessions is to be prepared, right? Because this is a different relationship than having a chat with a family member or having a chat with a friend, which is still very valuable. But you've approached this in a way that you are making certain you're getting the most out of it, which then also in return positively pushes me to potentially think differently about the barriers that exist in the workplace today. I didn't want that to get lost, right? I think that's where you get the most out of any mentoring relationship. And I think as a mentor, I appreciate that approach because it gives value to me.
Yes, well, I would say they exceeded my expectations. I purposely didn't really want to have very clear expectations of how the relationship would go, because I think with things like this, what we're essentially trying to do is something that often happens and develops organically. We try to programmatize it. And because I'm running similar programs, I know that that's not always possible. So I didn't want to have very clear ideas about how this is going to work. I didn't know Mark. I didn't know how our chemistry would be and what are the type of topics that I would be comfortable discussing. But what I did know that I wanted to tap into his experience of navigating complexity, managing stakeholders, thinking about situations more holistically and strategically. And that's definitely something that I've taken away, and hopefully keep building those skills. So that's something that's been wonderful. And I think the other thing is I just really wanted to work with someone who's made it to the top and is also a member of the community, and just kind of share some of my experiences and to be, I guess, inspired that you can still be really, really successful and you don't have to pretend to be someone else. Because I love that about you, Mark, that I think you're just unapologetically you, but you're very professional. And I think finding that balance, I think, is very hard. And I'm just very happy that that I can kind of learn from you and see how you go about things. And I didn't necessarily had this as an expectation, but I do feel a lot more courageous and confident in kind of advocating for myself, challenging in a constructive way, and not taking the first answer as the final answer, especially in situations where I know that my role is really to solve a problem. So I don't just stay on surface level. I try to solve the root cause, and that has an impact not just on my work but in personal life as well, which I'm just very grateful for and proud that I built those skills. So don't know whether that answers the question.
I chose to become a mentor because there's still a lot of firsts in our community, right? And I've lived through some of those. Being the first out chief diversity officer in the United States was a big step forward, right? There wasn't anyone to ask what it was going to be like, what barriers was I still going to um, be challenged with. And I think we have a responsibility, not just at my level of seniority, across the industry, that as we're looking for mentors, and I have had some amazing mentors, right, who are allies to the community, who are allies for me, that helped me answer those strategic questions that Szandi was talking about. How do you move from tactical delivery to a strategic level, right? What are the challenges? How do you have senior leaders who've taken an interest in you to help you untangle that and really understand what those career moves look like? I think we have an opportunity and a responsibility to give back, right? One of my goals is I want to see more out leaders. Well, the only way to do that is to help the community, right, focus on becoming more out at work. Right? Szandi said earlier, she was a bit tentative about coming out at work. I can't believe we're still having this conversation. I came out at work, I don't know, 28 years ago. Okay. I would think it's easier today. The reality is it's not, right? You come out of university, you come into a work environment that is different than the environment in which you grew up, where you went to school, and now you're hit with the cold face of the whole of society. So we're still having conversations, although it's become more accepted. In some terms, it is easier. The laws have changed in a positive way. Societally, there are still barriers in place. All of those reasons is why I became involved in the mentoring program. And then, as I said earlier, selfishly, I get a lot back, right? I get reminded, I get challenged by my mentees to have to really think about what's occurring today in the workplace and how has my experience maybe been beneficial. And if it's not, to be, honest and say, I haven't experienced that. Let's work through it together. So I have experienced challenges mentoring not in the LGBT Great program, but in other programs where mentees, well intended, didn't really show up. I said to Szandi right from the beginning, this is yours. It's up to you how often you want to see me. Introduced her to my PA, told Kim, if she wants time, I will make time. So that has probably been the biggest hurdle, is where mentees thought the mentor was going to drive the program, that it was up to me to sort of help them along. And I set the ground rules right in the start, right? It's your program. It's what you want to get out of it. It's for how long you want it to be. Okay. So even when LGBT Great comes to the end of the year and says, okay, time's up, I will say to Szandi, if you want to continue, if you want to stay in touch, just because a program brought us together doesn't mean a program ends this relationship. That's really over to her or anyone I've mentored in the past. So I go back to, you get out of it what you put into it.
Some of that kind of comes back to what we shared before around coming prepared. And I think it's not just coming with having a set priorities or questions that we want to discuss, but also taking the time to really sift that through and prioritize. What I try to do before sessions, like at least a week before, if not longer, I start to think about what's happening, what are some of the bits that I can probably solve myself, what are some of the challenges that I can discuss with peers, my spouse, can I read up on it? And then that helps me sort of distill what are some of those few key priorities that I want to bring to Mark, because those would be the areas where actually having his experience and expertise would be most valuable. So I think definitely coming prepared. And I think the other thing is being courageous and open once that trust is built, to actually be open about your thinking, what you're experiencing, some of your maybe worries, things that you're not quite sure about, because I think it's so valuable in a mentoring relationship, especially when you're mentored by someone who's not very close to your day job. You can be vulnerable because many times we kind of expected to know the answers, to be the go-to person, so you can't necessarily be always so open about what you may not know, or some of your concerns and some of your doubts. So I think if the trust is there, do be courageous enough to be vulnerable, because I think the more you open up and the more you put in, the more you can take away. But I think it kind of goes both ways, because I think with you, Mark, because you were vulnerable and you shared openly about your career history and your challenges and your successes, that kind of set the scene, and I then felt comfortable sharing in a similar fashion. So I think that's important as well. Maybe the third thing is following up with action. And I think I also say that as a mentor and as a practicing coach, I think you can have the best session ever, you can have new insight, but if you're not doing anything about it, then it's a bit of a wasted time for both parties. So make sure that you hold yourself accountable and that you celebrate successes. Like when one of our sessions really kind of encouraged me to go for an opportunity that I was really considering as something I wanted to do. So I applied for a trustee role, and I was successful. And I was just so excited to tell Mark that, look, this is something that I didn't even think I had a chance to get, and I was successful. So be prepared, be vulnerable if you feel comfortable to do so, take action, and celebrate successes. That's my 4 key pieces of advice.
The only thing I would add is, if a mentoring relationship is not working for you, speak up. I mean, just because you signed up to a year, not every relationship is right. I mean, LGBT Great is doing an amazing job of pairing mentors and mentees up. But if you're not getting what you want, right, to Sandy's point earlier, be open and honest. Tell the person if you can't course correct, get a hold of program manager, to get a hold of Lauren, and just say, this isn't working, right? And move on. Don't belabor, right, a mentoring relationship because you think something should be happening. Sometimes they're just not the right match. It's not that it's not a good match. And so I always ask in the beginning, what is it you're trying to achieve? Because I want to gauge myself as to whether I think I can add value to a mentoring relationship. Because I would do the same thing, right? I would have said to Sandy, I think what you want to do, there are other people. And I would even make the introduction to say, here's someone you need to speak with because they're more aligned in that path. This is a working relationship. And I think you just have to recognize that. Don't waste your time. Get the most out of it, but be open and honest in all aspects of the relationship to get the most out